Hey, I'm Ryan. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I'm also a real alcoholic and a ferocious drug addict. My sobriety date is August 19th, 2011. And that's from everything. I know that Kevin may have some questions on that, but it is everything. I just want to reiterate that. Kevin and I had some good times back in the day. But like everything else in my addiction, a lot of bad times as well. So I've got a sponsor that's worked the 12 steps with a sponsor that's worked the 12 steps and so on and so forth. And in my view, if a sponsor is wanting to sponsor you and has not worked the 12 steps, I would run the other way as quickly as possible. And that happens a lot. So if you're new, it's not a marriage. Find somebody that's got what you want and get after it. The program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about AA, which I'll tell you straight away, I'm absolutely convinced that God touched Bill Wilson, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit hit Bill, and that's why this book is here, because I believe that God was like, man, these addicts and alcoholics, they're crazy. Electric shock therapy is not working, throwing them in prison's not working. The devil's got a hold of all of them. People are dying. There was no recovery. There was no celebrate recovery. And I'm sure that there were some cases of people getting touched and made sober, but I begged Jesus a lot to get me sober. And I think what he was saying is you got to take action, Ryan. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And the book talks about many of us carry it to the gates of insanity and death. And I did that, 5 or 6 times. Should certainly be dead. And God saved me over and over and over. I've always believed that my higher power is the Holy Spirit. I mean, it's the Trinity, all of it. And even though I'm respectful in Alcoholics Anonymous with some of the language, which I think is important for people that have lost their way, they're agnostic. I've got guys saying the Lord's Prayer that were militant atheists. When I started sponsoring them, they're saying the Lord's Prayer on their knees with their son these days. So the big book is kind of a long game, is the way that I see it. And I was an active member of this church for, I'd say active for 10 years, but I go to Fellowship Middlebrook now. We're active in that church. And but I'm just going to jump back to when I was, I believe I was an alcoholic and addict before I even started using, before I took the first drink or drug. Drugs were my drug of choice. But alcohol was kind of the alpha and the omega on my using. It was ever present before, after. I got to the point if I had one drop of alcohol, the alarm would go off and I'd have to go get hard narcotics. My story's going to hit hard. Jerry Garcia says, if I told you about all the what down, it might burn off both your little ears. So I'm not going to say it. It's from the song Deal, by the way. But so I'm going to just kind of identify. I want you to identify if you're like me and have the same disease, then I think we'll have a connection. And hopefully I'll at least help one person. That's always the objective when you're speaking. I see some familiar faces here. Steve, Rick, bunch of guys, Kevin, Jill. So feel good being up here right now. But I can remember wanting to change the way that I feel from a very early age. And after a lot of step work, what we just read and the biblical connotation, which I agree with most of them. That's a topic for another day, though, Mark. But I remember my parents said they were getting a divorce. At first it started, my little brother fell off a car and hit his head, and he was 2, and was in the hospital, and I was 5 or 6, and I knew something was wrong bad. And that pain and fear, I did not want any part of it. And I had this vivid imagination that was like a drug. And imagination is certainly healthy for kids, but wanting to get lost in it for hours and hours and hours at a time by yourself is not a healthy thing. When my parents told me they were getting a divorce, I disappeared in the woods for hours. They had to call the cops. It was a big thing. This when I was 8, and it just started a cycle of. I had a hard time dealing with reality. I had a hard time dealing with pain. And, when I used, and, I hear a lot of people say that I took my first drink and it was just the most warm, comforting thing in the world. And that was not my experience. My experience was when I got obliterated for the first time, that was what I found was home for me. And I had zero fear of any drug, any form of using. It all had this like dark appeal to me. And I was so, my will to use was so strong in spite of the overwhelming, God going, please, please, I'm having to save you over and over. My desire to use successfully, and that was kind of mitigate the consequences. I even prayed, I remember I got so bad at one point, I was like, God, I want to thank you for allowing me to use successfully. This is exactly what I wanted, God. Thank you so much. I mean, that's how deceived I was by the disease of, it is the enemy. So I consider my disease a living thing that talks to me and wants to kill me after 13 years sober. I still have thoughts that are just crazy. The beautiful thing is God keeps me safe and protected because I'm active with the program of recovery. But when I started using it, I immediately got in trouble. And the book talks about it a lot, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got tight at the exact wrong time, often. So even when I wasn't using a lot, I was getting into trouble all the time. Like I got caught every time that I did anything, or I did something stupid and got arrested, or, juvie, all these consequences. And I'm thinking to myself, the people around me are using just the same. None of them are getting in trouble, right? So I thought it was like, this is bad luck, really bad luck. So I woke up in a rehab and when I was 16. And my parents put me in rehab 4 times before I turned 18 years old, and exposed me to the 12 steps, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, NA. I certainly qualify for that program as well. And I remember, even though I had no intention of getting sober, but I knew that I had to play the game at this point. I'd caused too much damage. So my new thing was, let's lie and act like we're sober and act like we're going to meetings and all that stuff. And I played that BS song and dance for years. And I actually got my life together quite a bit. My daughter was born when I was 19, Mackenzie, and she was a gift from God. And it put the brakes on my using as she started getting a little older. And I got it back together for a while. And, for me, getting it back together is not what a normal person thinks getting back together is. That's taking a handful of pills, smoking all the time, going on various benders with, hard opiates, that sort of thing. I try not to be too descriptive, but I think you get the point of what severe using looks like if you've been there. And severe drinking, just the same spiritual battle. It's all the same. The enemy still likes to whisper in my ear that something may be the answer, right? That maybe Suboxone's the answer. I've been sober 13 years. I don't need Suboxone. And I see that taking people out left and right. Not that there's not a place for that, but that's a topic for another day. So I'm going to fast forward and just, my using started getting really bad in 2010, and I was also just living in sin, having an affair, and just as away from God as I had ever been. And I remember I was going to a Widespread Panic concert after I'd been working in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had gone on a bender the night before and had to go with my client to all these sites. The next day I'd been up all night. I looked like hell. I was still very, very high, very paranoid. And I remember thinking when I got done with all that and got back in my car that I was driving to Greenville, South Carolina to go to this concert. And I thought to myself, man, I really deserve to cut loose. I've been really, really good lately. I was a master at pushing that away. Like the consequences when it came to wanting what I wanted to do were, and the big book terms it, that we can't bring into memory with sufficient force the humiliation and suffering of a week, day, or month ago were without defense against the first drink and drug, is the way that I interpret it. But and I went to this Widespread Panic concert, and I drank on the way there, and I used a lot right before the concert, and the first set seemed to be going fine, and then the second set, everything turned evil. And I had seen this evil before, once with Kevin H. Back when we were like 19, where I got scared. And luckily Kevin was barely sane and could talk me through it. But I thought he was gonna have to drop me off at Lakeshore. It was that bad. Like, I'm gonna need mental health. I could be here forever is what I felt like. And it was worse than the Exorcist movie, the stuff that was going on around me. I think I'd tapped into a spiritual realm that I don't want to be tapping into. It's real and it's scary. But this concert, everything turned evil, and I was trying to make my way. I was calling people I knew there and saying, I'm lost. I don't know what's going on. I'm scared. And I got up on a ledge. It was the smoker section, and was trying to figure out how to get out of there. But all of a sudden, I'm up on the smoker section, and like, it's really bad. I can hardly open my eyes without seeing just something just terrible. And I hear this voice, sweet as honey, says, Ryan, God hadn't been fair to you. All the pain, all the suffering, God just let you down. And sweet as honey said, do you want to stay high forever? Do you want to live forever? And I thought that's exactly what I always wanted, really. And said, jump off this ledge, and that's what your reward. And I didn't know that I was talking to the enemy at that time in that state, but clearly in retrospect, that's exactly what it was. And I jumped off a ledge and smacked down 52 feet on my back and shattered my 1 to the 3 lumbar of my lower spine. And I was sitting on the ground knowing that I was tricked, that the devil tricked me. It felt like the anchor of the Titanic was dragging me to hell. I was in critical condition, but I could see, was still seeing good and evil everywhere I saw for 2 weeks. And I woke up finally from ICU, and my family was standing around me, and my daughter, my mom, and I made up this big story about how it was faulty construction. And I mean, I was just courageousless right there, courageless to do that and not accept any responsibility. But I was so ashamed of what I did that I buried the fact that I jumped off that ledge and got tricked to the devil down deep, because it was so horrible to look at. And while I was in there, I got severely addicted to opiates. I still reminisce on how good I felt going into the spinal fusion surgery. That's how powerful my disease is. I look at those moments that was bliss. That tells me that I need to be speaking of service and at meetings because my disease is alive and well. So you would have thought that would get me sober, but I knew God saved me, and I've rewarded God with years of physical opiate addiction, and my life went down bad quick. I mean, it went down like you wouldn't believe. And my daughter and my daughter's mother called me one day after a particularly bad run and said, "Do you want to come home, or will you come home and stay with us?" And they came and got me out of Atlanta. I lost them one more time on the way home to get one more round for the road. And I remember when I got back to Knoxville, my daughter said, "Dad, you are so sick." And the way she said it was like not just sick, like I was spiritual. There was a spiritual sickness upon me. And so again, I went back out one more time. I had a day that hit that was some stuff I couldn't deal with, and I was not being honest in my sobriety, which is, if you're not, good luck. We'll see you when you get back if you survive, because honesty is the founder. You don't even have to be 100%. A measure of honesty is what needs to get the process underway. And my daughter, I was in a hotel, and God was telling me, I was in there doing a bunch of bad stuff, and God was telling me, "Ryan, get out of this hotel room or you're gonna die." I could hear it from the inside out. And right then a cop knocked on the door. I'd been peeking out the window for about 36 straight hours, looking for one, and here he was. And I opened the door, and he said, "I'm not here to arrest you. I know what that crap is. I know who they are. I know what you're doing. Somebody wants to make sure you're alive." And he opened the door, and Mackenzie's standing there. And she put her finger in my sternum and said, "You effing piece of you-know-what. I don't want to see you till you're 10 years sober. What is wrong with you? What are you doing? This makes me sick." And I had hid it from her for a long time. And God knew that's exactly what I needed for her to see me in my full-blown disease. She was right. I turned right back around and started using again. Heard that voice, "Get out of that room." And my little brother, Bo, picked me up, took me to a little bit of a less crappy hotel. And I did steps 1, 2, and 3 on the floor of it. And it was, "God, I'm tired of doing it my way. I am so freaking tired of trying to run my game." I knew I was beat. I used to always think, maybe I've got another good 5 years of using it me. Maybe I've got another good 2 years. Maybe I've got 6 months. The whole gig was up. Like, the disease had me by the throat. And I had a moment of absolute peace. And the way my state of mind right then, what I was doing, there was no peace going on. But God broke through because I humbly asked him. And he came, and I got busy. I went to Celebrate Recovery my first year, relentlessly, maybe a couple of years, I don't know. And just kind of found my home in AA. And so I'm an active member of AA. Year 5, I had a horrible bout of death in the family, and my mom had pancreatic cancer. I was caring for her. There was a basket of all my favorite opiates at the foot of the bed the whole time, and God kept me sober. And there was a few moments where the pain was so great where I was like, "That looks good right now," and I would hear God say, "I got this. You just take care of your mom. I got this." And I literally was hearing that over and over. I'm married to a woman in the program. She's got 15 years sobriety. I've got my daughter, incidentally, didn't talk to me for 1 year. And she called me on my first birthday when I was 365 days sober and said, I love you. And I didn't call her for a year. I had all these women saying, she's not ready. You got to let her, she's got to heal, and that's not on your time frame. And everything's on Ryan's time frame. And so I remember when I was 90 days, when I was 6 months, I was like, yeah, I'm doing so good though, you know, but if I would have used one more time, I would have destroyed every relationship that I ever had with the people that love me. And so I had to be patient and realize that God had work to do that I had nothing to do with but stay sober. And now I'm the rock in her life. She's my... sorry, I cry every time. I try not to, but every time I talk about this, she's the rock of my life. I have 2 grandkids, Knox and JJ, and my wife and I just adopted a baby from a drug addict mom that abandoned the baby at a Missouri hospital. The baby had meth, Suboxone, opiates, and the umbilical cord. But the way it happened, it was so clear that God was moving the winds. And so I was just like, the answer's yes, we're going to do this. And it was so hard to do, but we had to get lawyers in Missouri, but God was just there the whole time. And Mason is just incredible. He's a beautiful, beautiful kid. And so we're very, very blessed. I think Rick sees Mason some over there at Fellowship. But you know, I'll say one of the most important things, there's a line in the big book in the doctor's opinion says that the message that can hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, they must be grounded in the power greater than themselves if they're to recreate their lives. And to me, there are no exceptions to that rule. That the higher power, which is Jesus Christ, is everything to me. I will say that the steps, one I feel like I've always wanted to touch on this, but I haven't stressed it, but doing your amends, that is where the good stuff happens. Like that is where God, like, don't skimp out on the inventory and the amends. One, if you skip out on the inventory, you'll die. It's just the way it is. If you skimp out on the amends, you'll go crazy. Like literally, I've seen people that's parents die and they've been 6 years sober and not made the amend to their mother. You don't want to be that. I've seen those people just get all twisted up. Financial amends was a big deal. God wanted me to pay people back. And luckily, my sponsor was creative with that because I would have had a felony in 32 states. And, you know, I certainly wasn't ready to report myself to federal prison. What use would God, I'm sure he'd find a way to use me, but that's also a story for another day. My life is just incredible now, and honestly, there are no worse alcoholics and addicts than me. If God can do it for me and the program can do it for me, Celebrate Recovery, the whole deal, then it can happen for you too. I want to read one quick thing on 275 that I think is a great description of what the program is. And it says, letting go of everything was at once both painful and terrifying. I could have never accomplished this alone. It took the help, understanding, and wonderful companionship that was freely given to me by my alcoholic and drug addict friends. This is a program of recovery embodied in the 12 steps. And learning to practice these steps in my daily living, I began to acquire faith and a philosophy to live by. Whole new vistas were opened up for me, new avenues of experience to be explored, and life began to take color and interest. In time, I find myself looking forward each day with pleasurable anticipation. AA is not a plan of recovery that can be finished and done. It's a way of life, and the challenge contained in its principles is great enough to keep any human being striving for as long as they live. We cannot outgrow the plan. As arrested alcoholics, we must have a program of living that allows for limitless expansion. Keeping one foot in front of the other is essential for maintaining our arrestment. Others may idle in a retrogressive groove without too much danger, but retrogression can spell death for us. And not to end on a earnest note, but that's just the way it is if you're playing the game that I was playing. For me, that retrogressive groove spells nothing but sin and death. And so I'm grateful that there's another way. Thanks.